Christmas Eve. This is episode number 143 of the Cozy Corner of Cinema, being recorded on Christmas Eve, December 24th, 2024 at 12:07 p.m. It's a white Christmas. We got snow overnight and it is beautiful outside. The trees in the foreground that are accentuated with the snow behind it really kind of just highlights the beauty of it all, man. I mean, the dead branches, they're hanging on for dear life. You see a couple of birds flying around, they're getting ready for hibernation. And it's just a wonderful, wonderful sight. It's just a wonderful time of the year, a real cozy time of the year, a time to put things in perspective for the end of the year, get done what we need to get done, watch the films that we need to watch. People are going to be putting out their favorites of the year list. I already see those popping up. We start to consider films for the Academy Awards in February. And it's interesting. Last night I was talking to some acquaintances, and we were discussing the not necessarily predictions, but what we think. Well, I guess could be predictions of Oscar kind of nominated films this upcoming February. And this year it's peculiar because some of the big films that I imagine will probably get nominated. I think are all that I've seen. I've liked, but there's not been much lately. I've been overwhelmingly enthusiastic about like last year. Last year, we had some really terrific films nominated for Best Picture. Of course, Oppenheimer. Anatomy of a Fall, The Holdovers, Zone of Interest. Really excellent films. And this year, I'm kind of I'm looking at some of these films here, and there's not much I don't like. But there's nothing I'm quite overwhelmed with. Where I'm like, man, that was one of the best things I've seen this year. It's kind of like, all right, yeah, that was good. That was a good film. There's still some to see. I think the last kind of big one that I need to see in terms of which I imagine will be nominated is Brady Corbett's new film, The Brutalist, which will be opening here in the middle of January. So that's going to be really cool to see that. Very curious about that. Brady Corbett's a very interesting filmmaker. I don't know how much of his work I've seen, but I know I've seen at least some. And also, he's an actor as well. People may remember him from the remake of Funny Games. He was also in Mysterious Skin, the Greg Araki film. And so this is actually his third film. I guess I was mixing up somebody else. I'd only seen his film Vox Lux from 2018, which I wasn't very much a fan of. But The Brutalist, it looks fascinating. So that'll be seen when the time is right. And keep an eye out for those 70mm showings, man. I've been seeing those pop up. I was talking to an acquaintance of mine. He was saying they were popping up around him. And so keep that in mind going forward. But those films will be watched in due time. There's still some films that are coming out this week that'll be watched. But I've added some more to my favorites kind of list. And I've got a pretty solid list now. I got to say, I'm at that point where now removing films is definitely a bit of a challenge as to what I like more than others. And just some really cool stuff this year. It's going to be great seeing a lot of people's lists and films people are talking about that may not have gotten the attention that it should have. Because even when you look at even like the films released by Neon or A24, I mean, they're still getting, for the most part, wide releases. I mean, I'm talking about the films that really kind of fly under the radar, that people really aren't mentioning in the general kind of conversation. So that's really fun to see those kind of pop up. So yeah, because I think I have one more episode before the end of the year, so we'll talk more on that one. And I forgot what I was going to say, actually, too, in the context of the end of the year. But if I remember, I remembered. If I don't, I don't. Man, last week, I tell you, I was real bummed that recording got messed up on me because it was such a frustrating task trying to get that episode recorded. There were so many obstacles in the way, and then I finally get it recorded. Microphone messes up, and then the last 12 or so minutes cut out. So I really didn't get to talk about Queer, at least on microphone. because I did end up talking about it for the rest of the episode, and how much of a fan I was of the film. And I remember what I was going to say now. I was going to say there will be another episode of Peephole Pictures before the end of the month. I have the December and November are always such a busy time of the year. There's so much happening that to devote the time to research, take notes, really go and really look at these films. It's a task that is time consuming, and I just have not had the opportunity. But the next film is already selected, so that'll be put up before the end of the month. So keep an eye out on that, because it's been a little while since the last episode. I think the last one was published on Halloween. That was episode number 13, talking about Let My Puppets Come. So the next film will be put out fairly soon. But anyways, what was I saying before? Yeah, so I didn't get an opportunity really to talk about it on microphone, but yeah, just wanted to say that it's a terrific film. Fans of William S. Burroughs will know what they're getting into. Those who are unfamiliar with his work may be off-put by the otherworldly, at times hallucinogenic nature of the film, but I think it's what I've said before is that Luca Guadagnino, who I'm not the biggest fan of his work, I was really taken aback by how much I liked Queer. And Challengers was very good this past year too, but I think I like Queer quite a bit more. It's more kind of my sort of film than Challengers, but Challengers is also very good. Definitely has had two really solid films this year. So here we go. I have been in the middle of reading a very famous book. Well, I should say famous in the context, and also this will lead to some film kind of talk here. But here we go. Let me just get this up here. Give me one moment. All right, so let's get this. So we're going to be talking about the popular book, 1984, Wired, The Short Life and Fast Times of John Belushi, written by Bob Woodward. It's a very famous novel. It's as the title would suggest, it's about the short life, of course, and eventual death of John Belushi, famous in the 1970s and 80s, working on SNL, being in films like Animal House, 1941, The Blues Brothers. And it's a controversial book. It's a book that really kind of delves into just how chaotic of a life that John Belushi had, his intense drug use, his addictions, his ups and downs. And it's a book that it's been called many things. Sensational, it's been called exploitive. And I think that ultimately it's a book that is examining someone who was always going to be addicted to this. It's a lot of addicted to just more and more excess, this kind of lifestyle, this sort of, then the highs are high, the lows are lows, and what do you do to balance them out? Being kind of thrusted into this spotlight, being thrusted into fame. When you end up working your way up, and being such a force of nature, a comedic force of nature, really kind of just overpowering everybody else in the scene. Early on when he's talking about when they were, I forgot where he was working at. It wasn't. I don't know if it was Second City or what. I apologize. I remember, but. How he would really kind of overtake a lot of the scenes he was in were supposed to be a kind of group effort, and ironically because of that, that kind of gets him this more kind of recognition as somebody who is just really kind of this force to be reckoned with. And of course in SNL, he is really kind of shines there, so it starts to sort of butt heads with Chevy Chase, and then Animal House becomes a big film. He really, Bluto steals the scenes in the films, and at the same time, it's like this kind of desire to do something more with his career, to not just be doing the same thing. But ultimately, it's just himself kind of getting in the way. These addictions, these drugs, these people who he's hanging out with, and people who really loved and cared about him, and their sympathy, but also their frustration at somebody who is just constantly, going over the edge and is constantly, either soaring really high or stooping really low. It's a book that's been criticized, like I said before, for being sensational. I'm still halfway through it, but I definitely get some of the criticisms behind that. I think a lot of the book so far, it kind of undershadows or undersells, I should say, really just how talented and how really smart Belushi was. Ultimately, he was somebody who was crippled by his addiction, but I think one of the things that the book really doesn't go into too much is it. I mean, so let me get a sip of this cocoa right here, man. I'm drinking hot cocoa, man. 'Cause it's a beautiful day out, so it's perfect for this time of the year. But really, I mean, everyone at SNL at that time, in the early days, really kind of had something to bring forward to, and it wasn't just kind of luck that a lot of these people. I mean, maybe some luck. I mean, I think putting yourself in any kind of situation, it's talent, some luck, being in the right place at the right time. But of how much of how great Belushi actually was, because I think it's very easy to kind of look at somebody like Belushi or Chris Farley, these funny fat guys who died young, and it's easy to kind of be like, oh well, they're just the physical kind of like comedy sort of guy. But comedy is such a tricky thing to do, and it's not going to work for everybody. And the fact that these guys really kind of had their own specific chaos, really, that kind of makes them uniquely their own. How Belushi and Farley are so uniquely, they have so much in common, in their comedy and their life, but they're also uniquely different. How you couldn't, probably see Chris Farley in something like the Blues Brothers, and you couldn't see John Belushi in something like, I would, like Tommy Boy or something, because it's not just the yelling, and it's not just the going crazy and all that. It's a lot of the mannerisms that Belushi brings to his comedy. Like, one of my favorite moments in Animal House is really when he breaks the fourth wall, when he's peeping through the window and he just looks at the camera. It's a perfect fourth wall break, and just the way that he raises his eyebrows, it's very uniquely him. But the book is I think well written. I mean, it's very engaging and kind of goes through this really kind of crazy, hectic sort of lifestyle. People love you one second, people hate you the next. You getting in fights with producers and stuff. Really kind of his troubled relationship, a brief kind of relationship with Jack Nicholson on Going South, which I guess I forgot he was even in the movie. I saw Going South actually earlier this year, and I bought that cinematograph release, and I really wasn't a fan of it. It wasn't really for me. And actually, funnily enough, having just read the Marilyn Chambers biography, Pure, how really kind of cruel that Jack Nicholson and Art Garfunkel was in the audition process to Marilyn Chambers, and Jack Nicholson kind of liking Belushi's comedy style, but I mean, it's kind of like everybody not treating him. It's like a back and forth thing between Belushi and the rest of the cast. And I mean, Blues Brothers, of course, is I think just one of the great films of. I always forget, is that 80 or is that late 70s? I always get it mixed up. That's 1980. Okay. And actually, as I look that up here, ooh, what is this? The Blues Brothers, the making, an epic God, of course, it doesn't give you the whole title. The Blues Brothers, an epic friendship, the rise of improv, and the making of an American film classic. Ooh, now this will be read at some point. Came out in March of this year, written by Daniel DeVise. Ooh, now that is cool, man. I wish I had known about this previously. I may have, people were talking about, hey, man, what kind of books you want for Christmas? I'm like, man, this would have been on the list, man. And actually, acquaintance of mine, I'm talking to him about this book, and he gifted me a copy of Blues Brothers 2000, which I've heard is not very good, but will be watched in the context. I should also say, in the context of this book as well, there's two books that'll be read at some point. Samurai Widow, written by his widow, of course, Judith Belushi, who plays a big part in the book, and sort of her frustration and sadness at John's lifestyle, as well as a 2005 biography. Was this 2005? Yeah, that's just simply called Belushi, a biography by Judith Belushi as well, and then Tanner Colby. Those will be read. And there was also a documentary that was made a couple years ago. I think it was like a Showtime documentary. It may have just been called John Belushi. I don't know, or Belushi. I'm not really sure. But yeah, I mean, Belushi is just a very fascinating guy, and I think that the book does do a good job of just showing how kind and how loving he could be. But at the same time, for no real reason, well, I don't want to say for no real reason because of the drugs or anything else that was going on, just really could kind of flip and could be frightening. And I get. I get the criticisms of the book, but I do think that it is engaging and interesting portrait of just a really unique comedian and somebody who I think with SNL. When people talk about the best, and I don't really watch SNL, I haven't watched it in a long time, but people talk about the best eras, it's when you just happen to kind of have lightning in a bottle, where you have really funny comedians all at once, the show has had highs and lows in terms of the cast. I think I haven't kept up with it, but I think the past kind of decade or so has been really rough, where there's not, I'm not, up to date in a lot of like comedians and stuff, but just, it doesn't have quite the, not quite the stars that maybe the mid 2000s was giving us. You had just really funny people like Bill Hader and Kristen Wiig, Amy Poehler, Tina Fey, Bobby Moynihan. Just a lot of really funny people. I know I'm kind of combining arrows there, but you get what I mean. But who knows, man? I mean, the show has hit highs and lows, and I think also the '90s as well. I mean, you have people like Norm Macdonald who's just so funny, and you have Adam Sandler, and you just have Chris Farley, all these Chris Rock, all these really funny guys, just happening to hey, we're all here at once, and we just have some really solid right. And also the writers too, of course, but I think that's why these performers kind of stand the test of time and why these people from this era, John Belushi and Chevy Chase, Gilda Radner, Dan Aykroyd, really funny people. And that's going to lead into a conversation of two films I want to mention up here. I was talking about my favorite films of 2024, or some of them, and one of them it really kind of came and went, unfortunately. It's Saturday Night, directed by Jason Reitman. And it's a fictionalized kind of account of the first night of Saturday Night Live, this gamble of a show going up against Johnny Carson. It was an untested, sort of like a new kind of idea to do this like kind of live presentation and all the problems that go along with it. It takes some of the real life anecdotes of things that happened throughout the history of SNL and kind of condenses them into one film. So or condenses them here, I should say. So for example, like in Wire, they talk about at one point in the show they had to have like a woman from like the decency of like broadcasting or something like that. She was from like the Catholic Church, I think. She had to come in there and kind of clean up some of the jokes, and they put that in the film a little bit. But that didn't happen until a bit later, and then, to my knowledge, I don't think, there's a point in the film where they can't find John Belushi, and he's off doing his thing. I don't think that's actually true. I think that may have just been made up for the film. But either way, I think what the film does really well is have a relentless, kind of constant energy that's exhausting, but is also incredibly fun as well. When I say exhausting, I don't even mean that as a negative, but I mean truly the chaotic nature of everybody running around, everybody trying to set up this thing, everything going wrong. George Carlin's being difficult to deal with, everybody's kind of running around, they have to cut out certain gags, they don't know if it's going to work on time, and if they don't get this right, well then, then they're off the air, they're done, and how much Lorne Michaels, played by, who's that actor here? I want to make sure I give credit to him, Gabriel LaBelle, really kind of has to hold up the film. How much is on the line for him. J.K. Simmons comes in at one point and basically is saying, like, if you don't get this right, then you're screwed, then we're going to put on Carson and we're going to be ready to go if even something goes wrong. So it's all these spinning plates that have to be spun perfectly at the right time to get this to work. And I will say at the very, very end of this film is one of the most satisfying, one of my favorite endings of the year, because when it finally crescendos and the credits come up, it is so like, wow, they really nailed that. And for as much as I like this film, I was again kind of surprised this is really being not talked about a whole lot. I think with a film like this being overshadowed by some of these really big kind of fall winter movies, it's a real shame. I mean, it's available on video on demand now to like rent, but I hope that at least when people are talking about favorites of the years or films may have missed out on, this is brought up because I really like this film. I had a lot of fun watching this theatrically, and the acting in this I think is really top notch. I mean, everybody's doing impressions of other people. You have Dylan O'Brien playing Dan Aykroyd, Corey Michael Smith playing Chevy Chase. Nicholas Braun playing Andy Kaufman, which is very funny in the movie, and they're all impressions, but they don't feel like, it doesn't feel like an SNL skit. It actually feels like they're doing a really kind of loving tribute to these great comedians. And I was watching a little video of Dan Aykroyd looking at kind of the set from like a model for the set, and he was talking about some of his memories there. And again, this is one of my favorite films of the year. Really kind of came and went, unfortunately. Everybody I know saw it, liked it, at least. I didn't really hear much from acquaintances. I think I had like one acquaintance who didn't like it, but from what I can remember, unless I'm just mixing that up with somebody else. But a solid film. I think it goes great in context of reading this book, because John Belushi is a part of it, but he's very much, I think, trying to do Belushi is such a tightrope to walk that they do the right thing of not having him be a main character. He is in there, but there's so much more going on that it plays his own kind of unique, important part to the film. And sorry, I'm just gonna sip of this hot cocoa here. You gotta drink it fast, man, because these hot drinks, you don't drink them fast enough to get cold, and you just start tasting you start tasting really kind of the texture of the liquid. It's very bizarre. Very good stuff. And then in relation to that, a documentary I watched recently about Gilda Radner called Love, Gilda from 2018 is excellent as well. It starts talking about Gilda Radner's rise to fame, her problems kind of like as a young child being very body conscious. You know, she really didn't, she has kind of like self esteem issues. And eventually working her way up to being on SNL. She's very funny in her own right. The characters she would make up. Somebody who was never a victim. She talks about it, being the only woman among this male cast, but she's not gonna, she's gonna like prove that she is as funny as everybody else, and she rightfully does. There are just some great things. Like one of the great parts of the film is that people are, everybody's kind of like talking over each other. She's trying to get some jokes in. They're not really listening. So she's like, okay, well, I'll dictate the conversation and then I'll write down what jokes you guys have. And then what she actually does ends up putting her own jokes in there. They think it's great. So very inspirational, a really interesting life. Even after SNL, I was unaware of just kind of where her career went. And I guess I forgot that she was married to Gene Wilder, which is funny because I watched that Gene Wilder documentary last year, I think, or earlier this year. And for whatever reason, it completely slipped my mind. But as well, Hanky Panky will be watched at some point. That's the film they did together. And I think they did another. Oh, that's right. They did Haunted Honeymoon as well, which I have not seen. I've heard people say they like it, but in the documentary they're talking really kind of down on it, saying that I guess in the context, you have Gene Wilder who has this string of success, and he does. I think he directed that to my knowledge, but then he does that and it doesn't do too well. So people kind of were talking about like, oh well, this is her one big kind of like her chance at like a really kind of like important like big role, and it kind of gets shot down, but. This also has interviews with some contemporary comedians as well. It has like Bill Hader in the film talking about Gilda Radner, Amy Poehler, Maya Rudolph. Was she on? Was she an SNL cast member? I don't exactly remember. I'm not the most knowledgeable. I don't think Melissa McCarthy was either, but she's interviewed in the documentary as well. And these are brief interviews. They just basically talk about the influence that Gilda Radner had on them and on their comedy. Look at like old notes of hers, and it's a really touching documentary, man. It really kind of just Gilda Radner, I think, is somebody gets kind of lost in the shuffle from that prime era of SNL because she didn't have that big film like Chase had, Aykroyd or Belushi had, but Gilda was funny in her own right and did bring that unique perspective. Not just from being the only woman in that cast or one of the few women, I don't remember if it was anybody else, but still just making her own unique comedy as opposed to what everybody else was doing. And that's what I'm talking about before, is that with Belushi is that everyone had their own unique comedy, and at that time being together, so you could have Chase be a really funny straight man and Belushi playing it big and Aykroyd playing it very stern, and it's just really just like all of these funny people really kind of like just crescendoing with each other, and it's great. So I recommend that. Curiously enough, they had that movie, a very controversial movie, Wired, that was based off the book, starring Michael Chiklis from 1989, which has not been released. I don't even know if it's on VHS. I think it was released on VHS. Never gotten a DVD. Never anything. It's a controversial film that was. I don't know if it was. I can't remember if it was an adaptation of the book or it has something to do with something they did with the book. I've never seen the film, so I really can't speak out of line. But that's a film that's very much talked about, and even Jim Belushi as well. Man, I think Jim Belushi is actually he's a good leading man. He didn't have quite the. I don't. His film career wasn't as successful as John's. Granted, John. Animal House and Blues Brothers alone kind of overshadow everything else that John did, because he did 1941, Continental Divide, Old Boyfriends, Neighbors. But Jim Belushi, he's done some cool stuff, man. That movie Real Men from 1987, I think is actually a solid kind of film with Jim Belushi and John Ritter, and The Substitute as well. I think he's good in. I think he's a good actor, man. I think like he gets kind of like the butt end of the joke, but he's a solid actor, and he's got a couple like real cool films like that. I'm sorry, not The Substitute, The Principal. My bad. The Substitute is a different film that has like 4 or 5 sequels, I think. But yeah, The Principal with him and Lou Gossett Jr. One of those films where you have somebody else coming in to clean up the school, man. Movies like Lean on Me, and I guess also like The Substitute, just as kind of like somebody coming from the outside to clean up the school, and then you have like Class 1984, where it's just like everybody's just fighting with each other. And actually, funnily enough, recommend Class in 1999, which I like a lot more than 84. Class in 1999 is wild, man. that has a Vestra on Blu-ray, but that's these robots who are the teachers, and the robots go haywire. It's got like Pam Grier in it and stuff. It's a real cool film, and I'm a much bigger. I like Class 1984, but I think the mean-spirited streak doesn't really work for me. Whereas 1999 is so much fun and is so wild that it's worth mentioning in the conversation as well. So yeah, I mean, with I guess I can't speak right now. Good lord, the Blues Brothers being considered like an SNL movie. I'm trying to think like I don't think I've seen that many, but I think really it's just that and Wayne's World that are ones that are critically acclaimed. I would say at least. I mean, I've always been a fan of Night of the Roxbury as well. That's a really ridiculous kind of film. But a lot of the other ones I don't think, from what I've heard, are not very strong. I know people aren't really a fan of like It's Pat, Coneheads. I know people are kind of hit or miss on. I've never seen that. A Superstar, I don't know if I've seen or not. Stewart Saves His Family, The Ladies' Man, and Blues Brothers 2000, I suppose. So, yeah, I think it's kind of tricky to kind of bring some of these to the big screen because I recently watched, like, Strange Brew with, not Harold Ramis. I always get him mixed up with Rick Moranis and... Good lord, this is not my day. Rick Moranis and Dave Thomas. And that's a film that I know has a cult following. I wasn't really a fan of it. I thought it was really kind of grating, to be honest. But that's a film that, ironically enough, is actually seen in higher regard than a lot of the SNL movies. People have a real kind of fondness for that, and it's very funny to see someone like Max von Sydow in that, in this ridiculous plot, running this brewery, man. It's nonsense. I get the appeal of it. It just wasn't for me. But it's just a ridiculous movie that, it's like, man, it's wild as all hell. And then what was the last one? The last one was MacGruber, I think, from 2010, which I remember not being a fan of, but I haven't seen that since 2010. So, I guess, I don't know, I mean, there's not really any like, skits that really kind of cross over into the pop culture. I mean, you have the Lonely Island, who I think did two of the funniest films of recentest memory. I mean, and that's Andy Samberg's crew. They did Hot Rod 2007, and then Popstar from, I forgot what year that was, 2015, I think. And those films, too, I think kind of, 2016, I'm sorry. I think those films kind of have something of a cult following as well, because I don't think either did very well at the box office, and I don't think either were critically well received. But Hot Rod is one I've found myself, I mean, I've seen that film a whole bunch of times, because it's endlessly quotable. It's got this real kind of silly attitude to it. It feels far more of a throwback to something from the 80s, of just these guys who are doing this ridiculous stunt to raise money for their, for Andy Samberg's, stepdad. I think it was a stepdad, I don't remember. But it's a ridiculous film, and it feels far more sincere as a throwback than something that was trying to be a throwback. And then Popstar as well. That one, I remember I didn't see that theatrically. I saw that later, and that was one as well. I didn't really even hear many people talking about it, and how funny I thought it was kind of not necessarily surprising, but the fact that it was as funny as it was and really kind of got passed by on is not, I mean, it's kind of wild, but I would like to see them do something else, like another film of that. But again, I'm not really familiar. I don't even know if they're still around, that group. I'm not really familiar with their music and all that. I remember from them from like the SNL like music videos and stuff. But both those films are worth mentioning in the conversation. So. Yeah, I mean, that's like an SNL-themed episode, man. All these books, all these films to be watched, to be read, and to be reevaluated and look back upon these people who have just real funny people, just making their mark, man. Really getting out there and doing it. But hey, man, it's Christmas Eve. You guys have a wonderful rest of your day whenever you're listening to this, rest of your night. If you're listening to this in the future, that's great. If you're listening to this when this is new, have a great Christmas. I'll be back before New Year's to talk about the new year. And that's all I got, man. Thank you guys so much for listening, and I appreciate it. And have some hot cocoa, man. This is getting a little warm, so I'm going to drink the rest of this after I stop this recording. So take care, guys.